Howdy Howlers, it's Sako Toomey, also known as Cass Voit, and today we're gonna do a horror workshop. And I have a wonderful guest with me today, the ever elusive Dahlia DeWinters, aka Zame Hill.
Yes, that's my horror name.
Yeah.
They only have one book, which is co-written with me. So, but 2021's coming up, so
2021 is going to be a big year for me.
Good. I think it's going to be, yes, because we have all been in hibernation for 2020 and just getting everything ready to come out for 2021.
I feel like, well, I used 2020 to release a book, my debut. Like, I felt like if I was going to be isolated for an extra year, that I was going to like be productive and actually like
make good use of the time.
Because I've been sitting on this book for 11 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That is amazing that you had to kind of be pushed into your cave in order to push the book out of the cave.
Right.
There you
go. It took me forever to send it to betas and implement what the betas, like, because my first beta really helped me out with like the system that I was using. And
no. Keep going, sorry. Mute.
Oh, and Turtle That Is Red, aka Katarina, says that my book is a really fun read, which is a compliment. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Also, hello, Christina. It is good to see you folks. So for those reading my book, does it count as like thriller horror or paranormal horror, or I don't even sci-fi? I don't even know.
It's a mashup.
It is a mashup. I call it a cyberpunk thriller. Like, I think that's probably the most. Hi, Debbie.
Hello, Debbie.
About genres on Keelan Rivers' stream and how difficult it is to genre yourself.
Yeah, very true.
So you just gotta like throw it out,
and see what people say, what the masses say about it, and usually you say, okay, if that's what you think, then that's what it is, because it's different things to different people.
Right, exactly. She says it's horror. But if it were found in the thriller section, that wouldn't be terrible. Also, nice to meet you, Dahlia.
Oh, hi, Christina.
Because we got some greenhorns that just joined the community since you took your absence. So
that's true. I don't think, like I said, I don't think I've been on stream since January, maybe February. It's been a long time.
I used to see you probably March or April.
Maybe on some, must be on somebody else's stream.
I was watching you as I joined AuthorTube.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then you took your hiatus. And
yeah, I had to dip. Well, everything that went on after March, schools closed here and everybody was home. So it was kind of chaotic for me, because usually I'm home alone from 7 till 4, and then all of a sudden they're like, hey, Mom. So it's like, hello, you're still here.
So my character's avatar is apparently horror enough that that it carries through. Well, let us do introductions. Dahlia, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Well, I am Dahlia DeWinters, obviously a pen name. I also go by Zame Hill when I'm separating out my horror stories. I've been e-publishing since 2011, mainly in romance. But in the latter part of the last couple of years, I've done a couple of horror anthologies, Black Girl Magic Lit, as well as two Colors and Darkness anthologies. I love horror movies, but I also like romance. So, there I can do my whole Persephone thing back and forth there.
Which is wonderful. Absolutely. And howdy, howlers. I'm Sako Toomey. I write horror, and I'm a witch, and I'm a graphic designer, and sometimes I combine those three things. And I've been doing it a long, long time, 20 to 25 years. So if you are looking to market yourself as an author, or you are looking to be a witchy or witch, please drop by my channel. I would love to see you. Most of you know that I do streams in the morning where I review witchy books. So hashtag witchy authortube. So I have a presentation. Woo! And let's export this Lemma Jamma. So this isn't necessarily like write a horror story from scratch. You can take your thriller or your romance or your contemporary and kind of like add horror elements to it, just making your stories just a little bit scarier. So who the fuck are we? We just introduced ourselves. We've been at this for a hot minute. We are going to talk about subgenres. Then we're going to move on to pacing because they are very closely linked. I'm going to give 10 tips on how to write a horror, to add elements that are horror related, and then we'll wrap it all up with recommendations, examples of. We'll probably sprinkle it in throughout the presentation where we will recommend movies and books that used that particular step particularly well. English, I know it. I can do it. All right, let's get into subgenres. I am doing this on a word count basis. There are, of course, like Southern Gothic and Victorian and contemporary. And I mean, there's countless horror subgenres in that regard. Definitely. But we'll just get into like word count. Right out of the gate, we can do 3 to 5 words, and it's exactly what it says on the tin. It's a horror story told in 3 to 5 words, which is a challenge in and of itself. Like, I think the goal is to give a prompt for the reader to come up with their own horror story in their heads. Right.
So it's a jumping off point for the reader. Exactly. And following on what Sako said, the less words you use, the more difficult it is to convey an idea. So even though I have to write a 3-word horror story, good luck, because I looked at that when I first saw the presentation. I was like, yeah, that's not me. Because some people can do it very well. I've seen 6-word horror stories on Twitter.
Yeah,
that come off very well, and that is an art form that has to be practiced because it is difficult to do.
It is, absolutely. I feel like flash fiction is a similar story. Basically, it's 1,000 words tops. Basically, one scene. It's a little short story that hits the nail on the head immediately. So there's not a lot of time to build the dread. The way I do it is like 800 words of buildup and then 200 words of punch right at the end. I need to be working on the flash fiction for Orla Hart's anthology, which is going to be due at the end of January. So just in case you are interested in flash fiction in general, especially in audiobook form, we have another anthology coming out in like the 24th of January.
Oh, okay.
And lastly, there are, well, I mean, pulp horror, which is about 10,000, penny dreadfuls, which are about 5,000, full of action, to the point. It makes very good use of light, light, dark, the rule of threes, which we'll get into a little more as we go on. And then lastly, of course, we have movies or novels, which
Right.
can be up from 50,000 words to 75 or 80, which is another example of light, light, dark, and which is also how we'll flesh that out here in a bit. So as far as pacing, the way that you build a story is you start in the mundane, but there's the uncanny valley, which means like it's almost normal, but there's something off. And it's just enough to like pique the curiosity of both the character and the reader, and then they investigate the off thing, and
there goes your story.
That is how you kick off your story. And then jagged peaks. So what we're going to do is intersperse it with either romance or comedy. I prefer comedy, but every once in a while there will be like horror and romance like in the same story, so that you have light, light, dark, right? So you either drama or so something heartfelt, basically, or something funny. And then you have your spike of horror. So the longer you don't want to do it too long, right? But 2 scenes that kind of give it some levity, kind of give it a little bit of breathing room, and then punch them with the horror.
Right.
And you only have to do it with like a sentence, maybe 2.
Yes.
You don't have to. It's just long enough for them to let their guard down,
just to relax your reader or your viewer, and then
bang. You bang it in.
Yep.
And the way we do that is we use long sentences to induce dread, and to kind of like string the reader along and give them more to ponder. And then you punch them with short sentences to induce urgency, to get the heart rate going, to flush the faces, that sort of thing.
Shorter sentences make people read faster, and it makes the action or whatever's going on happen more quickly in their minds. As a romance writer, we're always encouraged to do long sentences, so it's lingering and it's just, and blah, 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 blah. But then, of course, action thriller writers like James Patterson, Tom Clancy, well, not Tom Clancy so much, but they use very short, punchy sentences to keep you reading and to keep the action going.
Absolutely. Now for our 10 tips. First off, let us talk about POV. However you do it, keep it close. Write in third person closed or first person, maybe even try second person. But the idea is to keep it close. We want to feel what the character is feeling. And, it can be even spookier if the character is the reader.
Right.
Once upon a time ago in a cyberpunk book, it was a supplement for vampires in the cyberpunk universe. And it had a choose your own adventure that was written in first person, which was phenomenal. Like as a young teen, the choose your own adventure with a horror element was like, chef's kiss. To make the audience fall in love with the character. Remember, the closer to the character they feel, the more they're going to commiserate with them. Third, we're going to talk about the rule of threes one more time. Light, light, dark. The contrast of the light, be it comedy or something heartfelt, and then the horror will make them both stick out all the more. 4, make the stakes clear. Why are we scared for the protagonist? Is their life in danger? Is their sanity in danger? What is it that we're scared of? Loss is something of a subject, loss of life, loss of house, loss of significant other, whatever.
Stature in the community, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. How did I do this? I did not do this right. Okay. Let's talk about blood and gore. It can be pretty spooky, but don't just count on sight as the sense that you write about. One of the reasons why Dahl Cecil Bruno's writing is so powerful is that sight is rarely the focus. So bank on the other sentences.
A lot of that is done in those some of the better done found footage movies.
Absolutely.
Where they're brought downstairs, and Grave Encounters is like one of my top found footage horror movies. They're plunged into darkness. So all you really hear are breathing. Of course, sometimes it's always, what's that? Did you hear that? And you never hear it until they want you to hear it. But by plunging the audience as well as the POV character into darkness, now you're wondering what's coming up behind you, what's coming up to the side. And yes, what is that sound? Or if they smell something that's drifting past their noses or hear a door opening, it really helps to build the suspense because you can't see what's going on.
Right. So, yeah, exactly. So explore touch. Is their heart pounding? Do they have goosebumps or raised hair? The smell, does it smell bad? Because a bad smell is usually the indicator of corruption or rot. So use that natural instinct against the reader. Taste is linked to smell, so bind the taste and the smell closely together. And then, like the squeaking door that we just talked about, hearing. So this is tough to do through text, but describe unsettling sounds, or better yet, because the general populace is rather attached to their hearing as a detection method for danger, take it away. Sometimes silence is more dreadful than wailing in the distance. Keep them in the dark. So horror stories are, there is an element of mystery. So one of the most horrifying parts of horror is the mystery, the unknown or the misunderstood. It's human nature and has been the cause of wars and horror all over the world.
Well, they do use that. I know I'm like a big movie thing, but in Paranormal Activity, when the characters themselves, as well as the audience, they don't know why these things are moving, why these things have been moved, what is going on, what is that sound? There's no explanation. And when there's no explanation for physical things that are happening around you, that does ramp up your horror. Even in just real life, if something is moved, you're like, oh, I could have sworn I put that there. You're like, okay, what's going on? And that gives you the level of, like Sako said, uncertainty. And if you don't know what's going on, if you're not sure in your atmosphere and in your environment, that does invoke a little bit of dread and maybe a little bit of fear.
Well put. Well put. Show evidence of the horror throughout the story, but wait until the end to show the antagonist itself. So this, you are ramping up with the dread, and it's the dread that you're counting on. So the slow burn is what makes a story scary, not the jump scares.
Oh, tell me about it. I've
They
seen
have their place too. They do.
they do, but some of these films are just like constant jump scares, and you're like, okay, I'm waiting for a jump scare now. Some of the one movie that really gives you that slow burn, slow dread is, and I can't, of course, remember it right now. Ethan Hawke is in it. Oh, it just skipped out of my mind.
Oh no.
Oh, he's an author and he buys a house with his family as two girls, or one girl and one boy, and it's haunted, and I cannot get it in my head. I should have written it down. But basically, you go into this house and you know something's happening. Weird things start going on. The kids start acting weird. The wife is like, we need to get out of here. He's acting strange. Of course, you have the sheriff who comes in and goes, da 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 da. But you really don't see anything that's going on until, literally, like you said, with your flash fiction stories, there's 800 words of buildup and 200 words of climax. And I think this particular movie, when I happen to remember the title, does it very well. And it does it well enough that it's one of the rare horror movies that I've watched again, and you still find more things that happen. So I'm going to look it up right now because I feel foolish because I should have written it down.
Slipping names.
Yes.
I believe Raven makes a really good point, is that loss of sanity, which I think is like key point of Lovecraftian horror.
Yes.
Is the whole premise of the unknowable, the things so horrible they couldn't be described.
Can't comprehend it.
And the idea of learning certain information would drive you to madness. Like that was like key for Lovecraftian horror. And then we get into like cosmic horror and that's elsewhere. Lock and Key, I think, is a great example of light, light, dark. Lock and Key has, at least what I've watched of it, is it kind of like strings you along with those, like making the protagonist a young boy, for one, because immediately we commiserate. Immediately we don't want anything to happen to the child, right? And the innocence and the idea of trust and the idea of just like having the experience to be wary aren't there.
Yeah.
Right. So the scene that's like speaks to me is when the boy finds the well, and then there's a entity in the well and he lets it free, basically. It basically can Lock and Key is also a graphic novel. Absolutely.
Okay. And Tammy has hit it on the yes, Sinister. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
After I talked about the movie, how great it was, right? Then I can't remember the title. That's funny. But that is if you haven't seen it, it's surprisingly good. I just clicked on, I think it was on Netflix, or it wasn't on Amazon Video, it was on Netflix, and it was surprisingly good. I was pleasantly surprised, which is rare when it comes to some horror movies on Netflix.
I concur. While the characters and the readers don't know much of anything, because you're keeping them in the dark, you as the narrator should know everything. There needs to be a point where the conflict is, let's see. So the breadcrumbs, the bread, and the birds that eat the bread should all be revealed, but it helps to know what they are as the narrator and just leak out the information gradually. There needs to be a point where the conflict is revealed and the reader realizes, gosh, now it all makes sense. So please don't discovery write your horror. This is not to jab at some of my fellow horror writers who I know discovery write their horror. It is a surefire way to disappoint your readers. The aforementioned slow burn needs things to be premeditated. So the ending needs to have the punch. Without the breadcrumbs, the pigeon isn't going to get it fat.
And you have one of those stories where things just happen and then all of a sudden at the end, oh, this is what it was. And I think as a reader and as a viewer, that's very disappointing, because it's like, well, you never gave me any hints at all about what's going on in the story. Things are just happening, and then all of a sudden at the end, the end, and that's a very poor reader experience. Like Sako said, you do have to, even though it may not make sense to the characters or the reader at the time, once they think back over the story, they go, oh, that's why that happened. And oh, like you said, gosh, it all makes sense now. And that's you can discovery write, I think, the first time through, but when you go back, you have got to sprinkle in those breadcrumbs.
Breadcrumbs, yeah. You need to know your mystery.
Yep, exactly.
That is an empty cup. That is hilarious. All right. Consider a false baddie and then up the stakes when you do so. So survival horror video games do this with multi-stage end fights. First, the baddie that's been chasing you all game, and then, or all movie, or all book. And then either evolve the baddie to something bigger, or introduce a new monster that's bigger than the last. So I call this the load-bearing antagonist. The load-bearing bad guy.
I can't.
Go ahead.
Oh, I can't think of an example right off the bat, but that puts me in mind of, you think you've killed the monster, and by killing the monster, that only makes them stronger. So you're like, and you turn your back, and all of a sudden he's rising back up out of the pit to attack you once again.
Absolutely. It is a trope, but it is something to consider when writing a mystery, is your red herrings, for one, and then your false baddies, and then your load-bearing bad guy, which is usually the coup de grace of your horror. Lastly, as you mentioned, the destruction. So destruction of the monster or the environment around the monster can induce not only that breath of relief, but the dread of what's to come can arise with just a single sentence. And that's one of the reasons why your ending sentence, especially in horror, is so important. You don't want to do like a end question mark. You would, it's much better if, like, there is evidence that resurrection is possible, or there is the impending dread that something else terrible will happen
from it.
Yeah,
that happens at the end of The Blob with Steve McQueen. So we going way back in the past. I guess that's the 50s, and I believe The Blob was unfrozen, because some guy took it out of the freezer because he thought he was defrosting something for dinner. I don't even know. And at the very end, they take the blob in its little case and drop it back into the North Pole. And because it's a 50s movie or a 60s movie, it goes the end with a question mark. So possibly because they did not really destroy it, it's a possibility for it to come back, sequels in the movies.
Yeah. Raven actually makes a good point. A good horror story has a plausible structure that engages the reader, either by being a jigsaw puzzle that they can put together along the way, which is also the mystery of it all. Right. Or a hidden picture portrait that only becomes clear at the end of
Right.
the story. Exactly. So it can seem random and scattered as you release information, but that full picture at the end is your coup de grace. Like that is why premeditating is so important, because we need to have all of those clues lead to the big picture.
Mm. And even when you're planning your story, even if you don't have an entire overall picture of what you want to do, one tip is to just jot down notes. Well, I want this to happen. I want this to happen. I want this to happen. And then with those 3 points that you want to happen, underneath that, you say, well, before this happens, I want this to be a clue, this to be a clue, this to be a clue. And that can help you not only with your plot, but how to weave in your breadcrumbs in your story and to get those puzzle pieces that the reader needs to put together.
Absolutely. All right. Lastly, we can talk about some recommendations where it has been done right. Cloverfield is really great at that closed POV. Get that man a Steadicam for one, but but otherwise, I feel like The Mist does what Cloverfield tried to do.
I've not seen The Mist. I've read it, but I haven't seen it.
The movie has an extended ending.
I did read about the ending for the movie and how Stephen King said he actually liked that one better than what he put in his story.
That like banks on the loss.
Yes.
What the future would hold.
It's definitely a what do they call those? A slam ending, something like that. One of those kind of ending. That's definitely a slam ending for that movie.
I haven't watched the series yet, but if it's anything like the movie, I think I would enjoy it. The movie has a better ending to the movie, but it's arguably way grimmer than the original ending.
Oh, most definitely. Most definitely. I was actually thinking about number 2. We were talking about making the audience fall in love with the character and the closer to the character that they feel. One excellent story is by Stephen King. It's about rats in the walls. And of course, once again, unprepared, don't know the name of the story. It's the first story in his anthology where Children of the Corn is. And I apologize for being off. But the narrator writes a letter. The protagonist of the story is writing letters to a friend. And it's talking about the rats in the walls. And you really get a very close, and it's kind of 1 and 2. You get a very close type POV because we're seeing exactly what, I think it's a he. Yeah, he thinks, he feels through these letters. And it really draws you into his character. So when the climax comes around, you're like, oh my goodness, da 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 da. Another one in a movie is the Autopsy of Jane Doe, where they're father and son coroners, and you can really feel the bond between the two gentlemen and how that carries out in the movie. You know, and I really felt that one good part of that was not that they were just random people, that they were a father and son, and you see a father sacrifice, a son sacrifice, and things like that happen in that movie. And it makes it even more tragic on top of the horror that happens with the other plot of the movie. If you haven't seen the Autopsy of Jane Doe, highly recommended.
Highly recommended. The revealing of the antagonist at the end, I think High Tension did this particularly well.
Yes.
It's a French horror. I don't want to give any spoilers, but I feel like the twist was delicious. And it was interesting to watch the protagonist and the antagonist reverse. Um, it was quite good. It's one of my favorites. The Mist, the series ended after a single season, okay, without resolving any of its plot points. So it was horribly fascinating, but disappointing that it ended the way it did. Which is
Was it on network TV or a streaming service?
it's on Netflix.
Oh, Netflix is busy with other terrible movies that they pull people into.
Yeah, but did you see Marianne?
No, I have.
It's another French
Okay.
horror. It's a show, and it is beautifully done. Like another one of my favorites. Like super, super excellently. Like the dread was handled beautifully. The attachments and the drama that was involved in the slow parts,
Mhm.
I thought induced dread more than they. Um, it was that slow burn that I really value.
Almost like that's how Gothic and Victorian horror builds their thing. It's very slow. What is that one that Netflix did very well? The Haunting of Hill House, when they did that adaptation of Shirley Jackson's story. I thought that was done very well. And some of it actually, there was one point where somebody was under the bed and the ghost comes in and he's walking over, like on top of the floor. That really frightened me for some reason. An old, I'm an old veteran of horror movies, but they had a lot of different shots in that movie that weren't specifically scary, that were frightening
Frightening.
because unknown. What's going on? He's under the bed. Are they going to be discovered? Why is this ghost-like figure here? It's a lot. I thought that series was well done.
And the alarm of being found by said ghost figure. The idea that the antagonist knows everything and the protagonist knows nothing is a contrast that I find very. I think that's what makes ghost stories so powerful. Is we don't understand the motives. We don't understand why a ghost would do the things that they are doing, other than like there's a trespasser.
Right.
There's no redeemable characters in the show, which is a terrible way to end your story. I agree. Exclusively on Spike TV before it ended, and was shipped to his streaming services. So cable TV originally, the nature of the mist was entirely different in the show than the source material. Yeah. And I intend on watching it, if for no other reason than to have my own thought on the series. I thought the movie was done so well that derivative pieces that are based on it just pale in comparison.
Yeah, doesn't need to be done again. Oh, a good example of an antagonist who knows everything and the protagonist knows nothing. Burnt Offerings. I know I'm referencing a ton of 70s movies, but I'm telling you, the 70s was a place when they scared kids on network TV. People talk about cable has nothing on what they put on television in the 70s. Absolutely. Burnt Offerings was a book first, which actually came out, interesting enough, before The Shining, which is also, it's a haunted house picture. Karen Black, was the queen of 70s horror movies. Some English guy and a kid. Roddy McDowall was in it, but they rent a house for the summer at a very, very cheap price. And it's a large, beautiful Victorian house. I'm like, you should have known that. But basically, the whole thing is the house is haunted. And if you haven't, I'm not going to give too much away, but things happen to this family. And it's a very, Betty Davis is in it too. It's a very well done horror movie where Roddy McDowall and his sister are renting the house. And you just know there's something up the way he's just like, oh yes, and this is great, and all right, have a good time, see ya. And I'm like, you won't see them again. You won't see them again. But if you ever, the book is very good. It's very 70s ish, and it's very dense, and it's very descriptive. So it is a slow read, but it's a very good read. And the movie with Oliver Reed is the guy, is very good. Very 70s, but very good.
Well, there's a lot to be said for the 70s. Like that was like quintessential grindhouse,
Yep.
and which were thrillers with blood and gore.
Much like who did the Grindhouse? It's called a Grindhouse. Rose McGowan, Zombie.
Oh, that
Gun
was,
for Leg.
yeah, that was Rodriguez.
Planet something.
Planet Terror.
Terror. There we go.
Yeah. Oh.
Which I also enjoyed. I didn't think I was going to enjoy it, but I enjoyed that and the
Tarantino, yeah.
Yeah.
Tarantino did the other one with Death Race, I think it was called.
Death Proof.
Death Proof.
Kurt Russell.
With Kurt Russell. I need to go AFK for a second. But if you would like to talk about some other excellent examples of horror,
sure.
That would be great. I will be right back.
Not a problem. I don't know whether I can bring up these comments. I can't because I'm not the host, but I see Raven has said, the haunting story that stuck with me most from the use was The Lady in White. I do remember that movie. That was something else. I don't remember exactly the plot, but I do remember it being very scary. And yes, the real antagonist was a living serial killer. Another thing that Sock was talking about with 70s movies, a lot of them were when horror was actually sort of emerging. Like from the 50s, a lot of the horror was very pulpy, not necessarily pulpy, very, I can't really think of the word. It's very in your face. Like, for example, The Fly. It's very, very strict guidelines, very distinct message. So you had The Fly, you had them with the giant ants, basically don't mess with nuclear power because you'll get giant ants. The Fly, don't mess with experimentation because bad things will happen to you. They were very moralistic. Whereas the 70s, the moral line was a little grayer and a little less finely drawn. And that's where a lot of the change happened in horror and in a lot of movies in general throughout the 70s into the 80s. Sako did talk about the rule of threes with light, light, and dark. And one movie that actually came to mind with that, Stephen King does this a lot in his books where it'll be horror, 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 and then something funny will happen or something romantic will happen to the characters. But one example that really stands out is in the Norwegian movie, Dod Snow, which is about Nazi zombies and a group of medical students who go on a ski trip and run into Nazi zombies. So there's a climax of the film. They're fighting the zombies. There's blood all over the snow and things are getting everywhere. These zombies just keep coming. And one of the characters said, "I told you we should have gone to the beach." And between all this gore and arms being chopped off and zombies' heads flying, I thought that was, that actually made me burst out laughing. It was actually pretty funny. But then, of course, they go right back to the horror. When you also talk about making the audience fall in love with characters, another book that was I am a big Stephen King fan. I am not a late Stephen King fan. I'm more of an early Stephen King fan. I don't think I've read anything of his past, I want to say Lisey's Secret or something like that. But in Pet Sematary, that really, first of all, it makes you fall in love with the characters. It's this young family. They're relocating in this great place. It's rural. He's a doctor. Everything's great and fun and fine. You get introduced to family and the little boy. And then he basically snatches it all away. You've fallen in love with the characters, and you see how this particular family deals with the loss of the child. I have seen both movies. I still prefer the book because I found it to be not only horrific, but extraordinarily sad. Very sad book, and it ends on a terrible note, which makes it good as a horror book, but it takes you through the ringer as a reader.
And that's how I feel about Japanese horror in general, is you come in knowing nothing and you leave knowing nothing. And it never ends well. It
No,
is never a positive
you
ending
have to
in a
be so
Japanese
careful with
horror.
Asian horror, because I thought, I'm going to watch some Asian horror. I was like, what is this? It's so different from American horror that my daughter says to me, she's a big horror movie. She's like, if you're going to watch Asian horror, Mom, you got to be careful. It's not Friday the 13th. And I was like, you don't know what you're talking about. You didn't know what she was talking about.
There is no
rules.
Structural format.
Right.
When it comes to Thai horror, Korean horror, there's I feel like Train to Busan.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. Yes.
Again, light, dark. It makes you attached to the characters and then takes those characters away.
I don't know if you haven't seen it, one of the characters, when people say, oh, I laughed, I cried, it became a part of me, Train to Busan, that ending, I was just, after the movie went off, and I was just sitting there.
Sometimes you need therapy after.
That movie, if you like zombie movies and you like family ties type movies, meaning very strong bonds and very strong backstories that are drawn very well in a short period of time. I mean, that dialogue snaps, you get the immediate issue of what's going on with that particular couple or person, and then they, like you said, they snatch it all away. And there's one scene that I'm like, no. But if you haven't seen it, I'm sure everyone has their particular scene in that movie where it's just like, okay, just here's my heart, put it on the table, I'm done.
Yeah. There are a couple of others, like the Ring series, which is kind of hilariously. I think the Americans did it way better because at least they introduced the mystery and they released information as the story went on, as opposed to the Japanese horror, which is like, you know nothing.
And then boo.
End of story. Shaun of the Dead is comedy first, and horror second. I feel this way about Dale and Tucker as well. It is first a comedy and then it is horror. So it is a comedy movie with horror elements as opposed to a horror movie with comedy elements.
I think it's done great. I really thought it was effective. I did enjoy it.
I like Stephen King's early short stories best. I feel like in his novels, he kind of dicks around. I mean, he loves his romance, but I feel like we spend too much time kind of dicking around. And then when the horror, which is why his short stories acted so much were more effective, because there was not enough time to dig around. It was premeditation and then a twist at the end. That was Nightmares and Dreamscapes was it had some gems in there. Trigger Warning by Neil Gaiman. I wouldn't say, I think there were horror elements, but it was mostly drama. Some stories were better than others, that was for sure.
A really good Stephen King, one of my all-time favorite Stephen King anthologies. Number one is Night Shift.
Night
That's
Shift.
what Skeleton Crew was. Not Skeleton Crew. Skeleton Crew is my second one. Night Shift was where he had the original short story novella of Children of the Corn.
Right.
And there was a story about Strawberry Spring. And that story was breadcrumby, excellent, and what a wham ending. But that's my number one favorite Stephen King anthology is Night Shift. Very well done. The stories were excellent. And can't say too much more about it. I mean, if you want to start with some King or you need a good dose of very short horror stories, that is the anthology to go to.
Ray Bradbury, too.
Yes.
Had his moments with short stories. Ray Bradbury's short stories are How I Cut My Teeth. Like, which is probably why I got into horror the way I did, was Ray Bradbury. And then like Fahrenheit 451 and
right.
Not, yeah, sure. But his short stories were so effective. It was 800 words of dread and 200 words of punch. And there was no wasting time. There was no wasting words. And his prose was like really visceral and really
to the point.
Really to the point. Excellent use of long and short sentences.
Another very good, very prolific writer who did, he wrote a Twilight Zones. I Am Legend is his. Stir of Echoes is his. Richard Matheson. Mm-hmm. He's the one that Steven Spielberg did his first made-for-TV horror movie with Dennis Weaver, Duel, where it's basically a man against a mysterious driver in a truck, an 18-wheeler who pursues him across California. And that was Stephen King's first made-for-TV movie, which was actually a horror. And of course, when in the 70s, you put this stuff on television.
Yeah.
But yeah, Richard Matheson has collections upon collections of books. And if you watch Twilight Zone Marathon on New Year's Eve, you'll see a lot of the writing. He's the writer on a lot of those shows. The Rod Serling one, not the new ones. I haven't watched the new ones. I won't watch the new ones.
I haven't either, but I hear good things.
I hear about them, but I'm like very traditionalist, which is I'm kind of staunch in that. I'm like, oh, there's no other Twilight Zone but Rod Serling Twilight Zone. So sometimes that may block me from seeing better, good things, interesting things. I admit it.
Jordan Peele, I think, handles horror very well. Get Out was more of a statement on racism and just societal oppression. But like everything, all the unknowns about it and all of the slow reveals were extremely well done. And Us was an example of revealing the antagonist before the end, but showing why the antagonists are terrifying.
Right.
Especially when I thought the setup was perfect for the rest of the story. He is, and his selection for cast is like dead on. I'm a huge fan. And it's because of his movies that I feel his show as his hosting as for the Twilight Zone is I feel like he could possibly intro stories in very effective fashion.
Okay.
Um, I need to check something real quick.
I need to know more about. I'm telling you, Raven, I have stopped with Stephen King since Lizzie's story. I think the last Stephen King that I really got into was, and I'm going way back. What's that house? Rose Red.
Rose Red.
Around that time, that's when I kind of dropped off of King because I think I picked up Cell and tried to read it and basically stopped halfway through. So I was like, this is it wasn't the old Stephen King that I was used to. I know one of my favorite books by him is The Dark Half because it's about crazy writers and pen names, but I just think that's great. But maybe I need to check out these new ones, Revival and Elevation, because I think at this point he's just writing and they're just putting it out there because he's Stephen King. But that's just my opinion. So
yeah, he's at the point
I'll
where
give him another chance.
He could sneeze and just put out a bestseller, but I feel like the audience has changed with his writing.
True. Very true.
So I feel like the target audience isn't those of us who were reading him in the 90s and the 80s.
That is a good point.
He evolved as a writer,
yeah.
And his brand of horror shifted.
That is a very good point. Yes, my camera's on.
I need my phone.
Come in. Oh, you don't have to duck, little boy. Get out. I got the CIA here on the camera. Ducking down. What is that? He's going to army crawl across the floor to get his phone.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to check out Joe Hill, Raven. I have never
Joe Hill has his moments as well.
read any Joe Hill at all. But I like to get into writers with their short stories because I think that really gives a good indication of how they structure a story. So 20th Century Ghosts.
I feel like the short stories are always stronger.
They have less time to play around.
Revival is super grim, and Elevation is oddly really hopeful. Had a genuine existential crisis after reading.
I definitely got to read this.
So, and I like writing stories that make the reader ask questions about themselves. Because the kind of stories that I write aren't how do I put this? I like to focus on the monster as the protagonist.
Ah, okay.
Because if they start out good, because you always expect the protagonist to be good, and then the protagonist will do horrific things or think horrific thoughts or whatever, and it's usually in first person. I'm actually going through and converting it to third person closed. Maybe a little bit of omnipotence so that I can head hop when he's unconscious.
Okay. That's so much easier to do, I'm telling you, in the horror genre and other genres. And romance is a very strict, you cannot head hop, you can only be in that's why I was glad to write horror, because you can basically do whatever you want. Whatever writing techniques you want to use, you can use them. You can skip around to POVs and things like that. It's a lot, more free to me.
You want to keep it close. Like the idea of like multi POV in a horror story, it's really hard to do it well.
Right, depending on how long the story is. But you're right, it's easier to focus because then the reader gets to, it's like I was reading a Jackie Collins book a couple of weeks ago, and I literally had to stop because there were so many characters in that book, and you were going from story to story to story to story. It was like it was basically a soap opera, obviously a written soap opera, but you didn't have the visual cues that you would have watching a soap opera. You go, oh, it's Tina's story now. Oh, it's Gretchen's story now. Oh, it's Tom's story now. You had to really I was like, I'm not trying to work this hard to read a Jackie Collins book from 30 years ago.
I'm not trying to work this hard
to be entertained.
to be entertained. And I run into that with a lot of horror, to be honest. I have tried this year and in 2019, I've been going out of my way to find recent horror books and really like dive in and get to know them. And I've been disappointed by everything that's come out. And I don't know if it's because I'm jaded or I'm just like, and I'm just hard to entertain, or if it really is poor. And, but it's a bestseller.
I think it's because with your experience in reading horror, writing horror, and watching horror, there is only so many techniques, twists that you're always looking for it. And I notice when I watch newer movies and I try to just sit down, I know Train to Busan really got me. And when I say I have seen so many horror movies that I can sit down and say, for the poorer ones, well, he's going to do this and he's going to do that and he's going to do the other thing and this is going to happen. And then Joe's going to jump off the cliff at the end, but he's really not going to be dead. He's going to come back. And, I think that's because, like you said about King, these are younger horror writers and they haven't had the breadth of experience that us as older, mature, ripened readers, writers, and consumers of horror have had. I mean, if you're going all the way back to people watching them and even earlier, I mean, The Picture of Dorian Gray, Oscar Wilde's horror piece, you've seen almost everything that they can really offer in horror. Oh, the good guy's actually the bad guy and the bad guy. You've seen it. You've seen it done well and you've seen it done terribly. So I think that's part of it, that you have to realize that you're not that audience for some of these newer books. I know I read one book called, of course, I don't remember what it is, but it was just from page 1, people were just getting cut up and splattered all over the place. And I'm like, what's going on? There was no introduction. There was no, and even as I read on, it was just like, oh, I'm cutting this person up. I was like, all right, I'll be putting this away. Thank you. But no.
There has to be just random splatter doesn't make sense unless there is the idea that, that person is next.
Right.
Right. So if you're starting with the splatter in page 1, there's no attachment to the victim. Nope. There's no attachment to the monster. There's no investment.
No, absolutely none.
They're counting on the gore to carry the story, and it didn't work out. Summer of '84. Meets the Hardy Boys, but there's genuine horror elements. I am looking into a lot of the stuff that's influenced by 80s horror. 80s was really big on splatter flicks, like with little bits of detective work.
But it made sense. For the one,
it was, yeah.
Friday the 13th made sense because it was like it was revenge. So you're understanding why all this was happening, and it is revealed at the end what happens. Now, the further films beyond that just didn't make, it was just like, here, we're cutting up people. Halloween, the original one, made sense. Homecoming, he's coming home to wreak havoc. But some of the movies, like I think we discussed before we came on it, Terrifier is just like, oh,
Terrifier.
Cutting up people. I think they're making a second one too. And I'm like, why?
Why?
But yes, what Raven says is correct about they have to successfully surprise you.
And that's really tough to do.
Yes.
I think, oddly enough, with like Marianne, there was the ideal was to unsettle you pretty much the entire time.
Mm-hmm.
And if even the action scenes, they added things to make it all the more terrifying. And for instance, difference in size. Like the monster is effing huge and coming for you fast.
Mm.
And just the idea that once they get you, there's no escape. There's
no hope.
There's no hope. And like, why is Silent Hill scary? Right? Not the movies, but the games.
I couldn't make it through the movie.
The movies are terrible. They tried to combine some of the games to make a whole story. It just, I feel like it fell flat. But because Kojima worked on the movie with them, it was, the setting was right, the creatures were right. I mean, the story had to be manipulated, but it was kind of a mixture between like 1 and 2. The other option with jaded audiences is not so much to surprise you, but still make a rote ending into still entertaining. Yeah.
Through the acting. If you can have good actors, you can sell anything to me.
So
I'm telling you.
So like my flash fiction, that I voiced it myself for the last anthology. I'm told that it's effective because of the way that I deliver it as we're leading up to it, and then the punch at the end, which is like maybe 100 words. And
do you know what's actually very effective on television? And it's everybody, oh, true crime, true crime, true crime. But I know Forensic Files gives you almost 20, I think it's a 23-minute program with no commercials. That's almost like flash fiction. They come right out of the box. When a body is discovered in an ancient field, we don't know what it takes, a crumb of bread and a scrap of tissue to find out who the killer is. Commercial. Joanne Watts was a school teacher. They give you that background. And even though they spoil it, because you know she's going to die, but they give you her background, her family very quickly. So you're like, oh, wow, you know, blah, 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 blah. Then they kill her off. And then they explain how they found the killer. So those are like very encapsulated true horror stories that I think, and because I kind of marathon them sometimes because I like the narrator, and they follow the same pattern. Mm-hmm. But it's still interesting because, of course, each subject is different, but they give you the murder. They give you the science that they use to solve the murder. So it's not a surprise. They give you the background of the person, the actual murder, how they solve the murder, and where that person or family, obviously not the person, he's dead, but where the family or the relatives are today. And it's the same exact pattern all the way through for all those Forensic Files.
Yeah. I think true crime stories have definitely have their place in that it's all the more horrifying because it actually happened.
Yes.
Like Fry and Pitch Black was good.
And Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte, yes. Yes. That and Whatever Happened to Baby Jane.
Whatever Happened to Baby Jane.
Those two were like, whew, what am I watching?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, those movies, Psycho, where that's a good switch from, I mean, how sorry do they make you feel for Norman Bates? Oh, he's so put upon. He's here by himself. His horrible mother. Oh, and his look what his mother did. Look what position she put him in. He has to. You're all just right there with him, and then it's like, oh, that's a really good example of just flipping the script.
Not just flipping the script, but commiserating with the monster.
Yes.
So that you ask questions about yourself.
Yes.
Right? Like that
you start rational. I can understand.
Start
why
thinking like the psychopath.
His mother, and you're like, "Oh, something's wrong with me."
Right. Oh, there's something wrong with me if I commiserate. Like, just how good a person am I that I thought the same way that. Yeah. So one of my guilty pleasures is The Cell with Jennifer Lopez, I think it is.
And Vince Vaughn?
Not
No.
Vaughn, but
Donofrio, that guy. The other guy. There's two Vinces that are like real tall and hefty. Mm-hmm. I don't know whether it's Vince Vaughn or the Vincent Donofrio who was in the Law and Order ones. I don't know which one that was.
I think it's Donofrio. It was an excellent example of don't hurt the kid.
Both of them.
And fear of loss, and just inherent evil, and how it can possibly be portrayed in the mind's eye.
But the visuals were so visceral in that movie, disturbing, and that really got you too, along with the story and the characters.
Mm-hmm. Especially the climax of the movie, the darkest hour, and then the climax. Mm-hmm. I thought was most especially done because the loss of hope, the darkest hour, was pretty dark. Like it looks like she lost. It looks like that's
it.
The story ended like that would be a tragic ending. Like that she turned it around and that she actually like got the shiz done, and the boy got the shiz done. And kind of like pulled her back out of the pit.
This.
Vincent D'Onofrio was the bad guy, and Vince Vaughn played the FBI agent. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So they were both confusing me. So they were both in there. I see what y'all did. Okay.
I know I've got it up here somewhere. I should watch it again. But the imagery was looking in the mind of a killer.
Mm.
Was interesting enough to kind of like build the dread, because you see the reasons why he does what he does, and then you see the execution of like, here's why he does all the things, and then the peak of the horror spike, basically. I just felt like, yeah, I thought it was well done in the commiserate with the monster, and yet not at the same time.
No, that makes sense, because you're like, there's a lot of people who have been through these same things who don't go out and kill.
Right.
But I can understand how it may flip the switch in a particular individual. But there's plenty of people who go through the same thing who don't go out, and because you got to put that on the end to make sure you're not a terrible person.
Creep was kind of like that too, in that you see how he thinks, and how he seems like a totally normal guy at the beginning, and the idea that you're getting along just fine, and then something in him snaps.
Yep.
And everything after that is you become the target. The protagonist becomes the target.
Right.
But you, in a way, you understand the descent. The part of the movie that messed me up was when they were in their brain and they segmented the horse. Yes, that also.
Thanks for bringing that back, Raven.
That imagery got me too, especially when I was young.
Yeah, like I said, the imagery. I watched it once. I would probably. It was an effective movie. I can't say that I liked it, but it was very well done. It's not something I enjoyed, but it was well done. So I think you can say a movie is very well done, and you're like, oh, I didn't think it was. I never want to see it again, but it was very well done. That makes sense.
I watch it a lot because
you have very short because the visuals just. I'm not even going to.
I thought the visuals were so well done.
Yeah, it's too well done, perhaps.
And I think that's what carried it for me, because it's not a good movie. It's not.
So it's the visuals that brought it home.
Carried it enough for me that it has me watching it again and again, and which is why I call it my guilty pleasure, because it's not a good movie. And I'm aware of that. Jennifer Lopez is not a great actress.
Oh. Why her, of all people? But I just thought of a great flip the switch, Frailty.
Frailty was good.
That movie I will watch over, and I'm always looking for clues. There's like, they got me with this movie, because every time I watch it, I was like, it's just at the end, and of course Powers Booth, was a big 70s star, and if you haven't seen Frailty, highly recommend it. Very well done. Bill Paxton, I think. Yeah, Bill Paxton.
Bill Paxton is a gem.
Yes.
Every movie that I see him in, he executes the panic and he executes the dread.
He has a lot. He has to be very comedic and he has a lot of gravitas.
He
runs the gamut of that, and he does both very well. He was in the beginning of Terminator. One of the guys at the telescope thing, the lookout, when Arnold Schwarzenegger first comes out, he's one of those guys that gets beat up or something.
Mm-hmm. Fascinated by the brain surfing premise. Yeah, me too. Mm. I really wanted to learn more about Jennifer Lopez's original patient, who had the human seal monster living in his brain. Yeah. He's passing with terrible. Yeah. Yeah.
J.T. Walsh, too. He was the bad guy. This is more of a thriller, actually, than horror, in Breakdown. With Kurt Russell and some lady. I just remember Kurt Russell.
Some lady.
Some lady, his wife. She ended up in a freezer or something like that.
So I'm an avid comic reader. Mm-hmm. And the whole women in refrigerators concept, where I think it was Green Lantern, where his lady was put in a freezer and she died in there. And that gives him the drive to go and pursue the bad guy and to his story at the cost of the female. And where do you split it between thriller and horror? So it is a hazy line.
Yes.
It's not. That line usually is horrific imagery, or like my book is technically set in a horror universe. Mm-hmm. And I only tap into it every once in a while. So I feel like cyberpunk thriller with horror elements because it concentrates on the plot and the story more than it does the horror aspects. I use
So
the horror
yeah,
as flavor, but I don't make the plot point the horrific thing.
gotcha. Okay. Hmm. I'm trying to think. People argue about Silence of the Lambs. Is that a thriller or is that a horror? And to me, it's almost like a detective story with horror elements. So does that make that a thriller?
I think the ending was horrific enough to where I would call it a horror movie.
Okay, because he's loose now.
Not
You
just
know,
loose. I mean, him being loose is terrible, but like the kind we kind of like lead up to Buffalo Bill being absolutely terrible, but then we are shown why he's so terrible,
right?
and the idea that he is totally free to do it again is like that's that. And I feel like Jodie Foster needed like mental health support after
Oh yeah,
Silence of the Lambs. She was she was disturbed enough by it that she needed help.
hmm.
And when it came to like Hannibal and Red Dragon and those stories, she didn't want to be involved
Okay.
because she had been traumatized so much by Silence of the Lambs that she was like, I'm done.
That's it. She had it. Well, you know what? I admire that. She's not doing it. She knows what's best for her. A lot of actors and actresses seem to just, well, I have to do it because I have to work. And I was like, well, it's always work at the post
But
office.
then we have stories like Heath Ledger.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
being the Joker messed him up to the point that he ended it.
Yeah.
And um being the monster and commiserating with the monster to such a degree because
That you act it out so well, that you embody it so well.
and the it becomes a crapshoot as to whether you can take it or not.
It's very, very true. As an artist, is how much can you possibly take? What line are you going to draw in the sand to preserve your own mental health? And I think that's applicable to writers, actors, anybody who puts creativity on the page. Like, where's the point? Where's your point that you stop?
Where do you stop? And the way horror usually works, well, thriller too, is you start in the middle and end in the middle.
Mhm.
So you never see, I mean, you start with action. You start, something is already in progress when you come in, and then it builds up and sets the stakes, and the stakes get higher and higher and higher
Right.
as the story goes. And then there's an ending, you get a climax, and then like one sentence worth of or a
Resolution.
paragraph worth of
Right.
like epilogue.
Mhm.
Um, one of the things I don't like about acting, method acting is a dangerous line to dance. Clancy Brown playing the Kurgan to the Highlander genuinely scared the cast because he'd embraced the character so deeply. He legit had to tell them to leave him. One of the things I didn't like about acting.
Mhm.
Yeah. So the difference between, I think, and I had to give this some thought, but the difference between like a horror thriller and a thriller horror is look at the plot points.
Okay.
So if the plot points are horrific, then I would call it a horror thriller. And you have the drama and you have the
Mhm.
mystery. And I think it's the drama and mystery that makes the thriller part.
True.
So how like I have a romance element to my story, but I corrupt it. So that loss, I feel like, is borderline horror.
Mm.
Because it's like, hey, I'm romantic with this guy, and then that guy turns out to be like totally
A red
bad guy.
herring. Not a good boyfriend.
Not a good boyfriend.
Raven brings up Nick of Time with
Mhm.
Johnny Depp and Christopher Walken, which I remember that was a good movie because it was one of those, maybe they were doing those experiments where the movie was the exact running time as the event in the movie. So whatever took place in the movie took place in the real time. That's what it's real time. That is, yeah, it would be a thriller rather than horror because it's a mystery. There are mystery plot points and things that he has to find out. It's horrific as a person or as a parent because you don't want this particular thing to happen to your family. Another one that I think edges that line is Tilda Swinton. We need to talk about Kevin.
Oh yeah.
In my head, that is a horror because as a parent, that's horror. But technically, it's a thriller.
Even those that aren't parents,
Or
like,
even,
there is. How do you cope with the idea that you propagated a monster?
Yes.
What does that say about you? Like, and do you have the nerve to handle the horror like that the monster delivers?
Perpetrated, like, exactly.
Yeah.
That was a very difficult book to read because you could see it coming.
Mm-hmm.
When you read all her thoughts, it was very close with Eva, who was the mother. The husband was kind of like over here, but you knew. It's like it was almost as if, in my opinion, in reading that book, that you did this because you refused or neglected to get help or assistance, and your husband was oblivious. Mm-hmm. And I felt that reading that book, Judge, that I was like, well, you did this. You perpetrated this. This is your fault. It was a very interesting book to read, to see her behavior and how her behavior influenced him in some aspects. Then you always go to the debate, is it nature or nurture? Was he born bad? Or was he born a little bit bad and what she did enhanced it? Or, what went on?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And you commiserate enough with the mother that you wonder, like, how would you have acted differently?
Right. Because hindsight is always 20. Well, I would have done this and I would have done that. But in the moment, what do you do?
I mean, her intentions were good, but the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? So, and I feel like We Need to Talk About Kevin is an excellent example of the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Like, do you guys think it's important to write things that genuinely scare you? So one way that you can do it is to tap into common tropes. I feel like it's more effective if you tap into uncommon tropes, like fears that you have to look deep for. Mm-hmm. The mind control stories terrify me. Being held responsible for actions I was not in control of. And there's a lot to be said for that kind of horror that I've never been able to write a story about it because it mentally repulses me so much. I've been kind of like surfing around AuthorTube and listening or reading comments from people who are trying to write conflict in their stories. Mm-hmm. And they're like, I have to write this fight scene and I don't want to write it. And I'm like, then why did you put it in? Like,
That's a good
you can't
practical
write
answer.
it. If you can't write it, maybe you're not
You're not ready for that yet.
ready for that. Or like asexual people being repulsed by romance scene,
Hmm.
right? I'm not repulsed by it, but I feel like I don't need it as a focal point.
So you're just not a romance reader, and that's
I'm not.
fine because
If I
each
am, I'm like Judy Devereaux, sort of like who did Judy Bloom?
Judy
Question mark?
Bloom is young adult mostly.
Oh, sorry, not Judy Bloom. Judy
I know you're thinking of Jude Devereaux. She writes those
Devereaux.
sweeping epic type things. Lisa Claypass, um, to a lesser extent, Judith Krantz,
If I
Danielle
know what
Steele.
I'm getting into,
Mhm.
if I know, like, and that goes back into like why I'm so disappointed with like stuff that's been released lately, is I I get something that says that basically says paranormal thriller
Mhm.
right on the cover, and I get erotica. And I'm like, why would you lie about your category? Like,
That is a whole nother video. I'm having been in the romance world, in the groups, the Amazon ads, how to genre your book, what to write, the formula to write to. It has become less. Okay, first of all, let me preface this by saying there's nothing wrong with writing for a business. I don't write for business. I don't write for money. I don't write for
same here.
sales. Okay, if I sell 5 books, 5 people I didn't know bought this, they liked it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it has, especially romance, has become a huge business where people are cranking books out using ghostwriters. I mean, if you would know the extent when you delve down into it, they're using artificial intelligence programs to write books. They're using sweatshop workers, I guess, to write books.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it might even be creeping over into other genres where people are just merely writing to get a book out and to put a cover on it and to put a certain genre on it. Because I've seen romance books with gorgeous, gorgeous covers, beautiful covers.
Mm-hmm.
And you open to that first page and it's like, who wrote this? So I feel when you pick up your horror books and you think it's a paranormal thriller, and on the first page, somebody's in bed with somebody. That's what it's kind of almost trickled down to. You really have to dig deep for decent prose and decent books. Now, if you're looking for erotica, you have your just check out the top 100 Amazon romance stories. You can get
I
that on the
just
second
gotta,
page.
I just gotta be prepared. The cover should prepare me for
Very
what
true.
it is.
What you're
So
getting
don't have
into.
like a horror thriller cover and then and a breakdown, like your cover copy is basically like, this is going to be horrific, and then on page one, like, the protagonist catches her husband getting a blowjob and it is particularly graphic, and I'm like, and then later on she's thinking back on it and she gets turned on, and I'm like,
Okay.
what?
I just have to laugh because I've had that experience. And I've read books that have been bestsellers, romance. So, you look and you read, say, well, what are they doing in this particular book that's so great? Probably paying a lot for Amazon ads. That's why. But it's romance's dirty secrets.
So this is a horrific idea, I think, because
I know that book. I don't remember it, but I read that book. I read it. Dean Koontz. Yep.
we had a dentist in the DC area that was drugging and raping his customers. And like, that's because you have to trust your doctor to like take care of you.
Mhm.
And if you're anesthetized, there's nothing you can do.
That's right.
There's no fighting back.
Nope.
And the idea that you don't remember it
That's
is
even
even
worse.
more
Mm.
terrifying, right? Because you feel invaded. It is gross. Because a line was crossed. You trusted someone. They
And an
crossed
oath
the
was
line.
broken. The oath that they took as a doctor, as a medical specialist, was broken. And you trust in that going into the office that, well, he's upstanding, she's upstanding, they're upstanding because they took this oath, they did all this, and they're just a creep with a medical degree or a
Creep.
dental degree.
Yep. A creep with a medical degree. Absolutely. So does anybody have any other questions?
Any examples?
Any
Because I know I didn't
examples?
cover all of them. Any good horror movie recommendations? Because it's Christmas. I recommend Krampus. You should
Krampus is
also
a good
watch
one.
Sacco's holiday horror movie.
I have yet to watch Rare Exports. I'm going to give that a watch today.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I asked my kids, you guys want to watch Gremlin? We already saw it, Mom. Okay.
Fun.
You hear old boomer trying to, be cool with the kids. I was like, all right, y'all want to act brand new? We're going to watch Krampus. How about that?
Mm-hmm.
So, the Grinch on steroids.
I felt like Krampus was effective because of the imagery.
And it was very comedic on top of it. I enjoyed it.
It was.
And I didn't think I would.
I think it was a gem.
Toni Collette brought that gravitas to it because you're like, oh, she's a very good actress and she's in a horror movie. This is, she brings that seriousness to it. But then you have flaming gingerbread men flying through the air on top of it, which it does make it effective.
So that book was one of the reasons why he resisted going to therapy for so long, on top of another number of paranoia issues. Absolutely. The idea that someone would manipulate you into reacting outside of your character can be horrifying. The idea that I'm on meds, especially the number of meds that I'm on, I am a wholly different person on meds than without. So a lot of people find that terrifying because they don't know who I am without meds. Because they commiserate with the manipulated version of me. And I argue that the unmedicated version of me cannot be commiserated with.
But how can you, if you argue that, then how are we commiserating with Norman Bates and Psycho? I mean, I'm not paralleling you two, but I'm saying a different type of personality issue. Absolutely. I'm not saying that you're Norman Bates and Psycho, but you understand what I'm trying to say.
I do.
That, when we talk about movies and people who do have issues, emotional issues or whatever you have, I think that's an interesting point that you bring up, that if you're medicated, they can commiserate you, but if you're not, they maybe because they already know you as medicated. So if they see the unmedicated, they can't make the two jibe in their heads. Maybe it's something like that.
And paranoia is like horror within yourself.
Because you can't trust yourself.
You can't trust others, and you can't trust yourself. The idea that you would put trust in a doctor and they would take advantage of it. Mm-hmm. Or people who fear cops, for instance, or clowns for that matter. You put trust in a figure, and that figure,
betrays you.
Trust.
Mm-hmm.
um, like why Gacy is so scary. He set the precedent for clowns being scary. And the whole Captain Howdy thing kind of just like put gasoline on an already burning fire. Which is why that clown is always fat. Which is why that clown usually has sharp teeth. Usually, like,
Oh, don't forget it.
It was
Pennywise.
another. Well, it and Captain Howdy were so similar.
Mm.
Yeah, I think it scared a whole new generation of kids, and which is why a lot of my generation grew up afraid of clowns, because the clown was like, hey, look, this funny lighthearted thing, and now that you're in my clutches, I'm going to show my real colors.
Yes.
So that's more of the like, ooh, I have a little boat. Don't you want to come and play with my toys? Or like the van where it's like, you want free ice cream? Just get in the van. So it's like, here is the thing to lure you in. And then once the claws are in, that's it. There's no escape.
I'll tell you one thing, though. I remember watching the TV movie with John Wayne Gacy, and Brian Dennehy was horrifically very good in that role. He was terrible because he was very cordial, very polite, very personable. You know, he did all that charity work at the hospital as a clown, and then he was killing people in the bathroom while his mother was in the next room. And just whistling, I'm done with that. So, hey, let me just, get something to eat. Very nonchalant about it. The way it was portrayed was horrifying. It was horrifying.
And the idea that this stuff actually happened.
Oh, poltergeist.
Poltergeist, yeah.
And that there are people out there, like you said, walking around like this. Some of them we have not caught.
Some of them we have
still
not
out
caught.
there.
Like Zodiac, we never.
Oh, jeez. There was a show that postulated that the Zodiac killer was actually the Unabomber.
Oh, that's an interesting thought.
There was a show that postulated that on the Travel Channel or History Channel or something I caught a while back.
Sure. Yeah. And the Unabomber was his own brand of terror, right? Which is why he's like, quintessential terrorist material.
Always the unexpected. Is that package going to blow up or what? But yes, Poltergeist definitely was. Oof. I remember him trying to throw the jacket over the clown in the chair, and it didn't work. I was like, what is the Poltergeist was a movie in and of itself. I think that was early 80s, mid 80s.
Early to mid, yeah.
Yeah. The remake, it had nothing on it. I don't even know why they even bothered with that.
A lot of the remakes, I just feel like it's an inability to improve on the original. At least with revamping Japanese horror, you're starting at the bottom rung. Right. So anything you make is going to be better.
And you're giving it a cultural twist also. So the Japanese characters may not behave the same way as you may make the American characters behave in the same situation.
Right. It's made for a different audience.
Yeah.
And it's got our breadcrumbs. We get drawn into the mystery. We commiserate with the hero, and then we dread the idea of them becoming another statistic regarding, death via video or whatever.
Okay.
All right. All the remakes seem to fall into the we can't be bothered to take a chance on something original, so let's rehash something with a title recognition.
Remember the shot-for-shot remake of Psycho? I needed a memory wipe after that. I was like, what? Why did I do this to myself? Why did you do this, Gus Van Sant? That's the only way I know his name because of that. I was why? And with these mediocre actors that had no on-screen strength to me, that I think that was part of it. If you had a couple of strong actors, it might have been different, but I just felt everybody was very meh about the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah. If you can't commiserate with the protagonist, or at least or the antagonist, if you can't commiserate with the characters, like
there's no use.
There's
really no use of even
there's no impact.
Right. There's no impact. It's like when you watch those the silly horror movies that you know are going to be silly, and they do something stupid, oh, we're going to go into this haunted house and run around and scream. You're just sitting back like waiting for them to get picked off.
Like
you have no investment.
Who runs up the stairs instead of out of the house.
Exactly. I hear something upstairs. Well, let's just leave. No, I'm going to investigate. Bye.
Or, they run from the killer and they run somewhere that's a dead end. Right? So
you've seen that Geico commercial, right? That they do around Halloween, where it's a commercial, a group of friends, of course, running around this haunted house, and they're like, oh, let's go hide in this garage behind the chainsaws. And one of the group says, why don't we just get into the running car? And the guys are you crazy? This is a better place to hide. And they go hide behind the chainsaws. It's probably on YouTube, but it's funny how they say people making bad choices in horror movies.
Okay, so the thing about Ryan Reynolds in Amityville Horror, he wasn't a believable protagonist to me. And then, like, watching his descent into madness, I don't want to say it wasn't believable, but it, like, at no point do you commiserate with him.
No.
Now, the only thing that makes that watchable for me is shirtless Ryan Reynolds.
With the axe, chopping the wood.
Or when he walks out in his pajama pants, like, investigating, like, what's going on with his shed in the middle of the night.
Oh, the boathouse. The boathouse. Yeah.
Horror is in his long suit. It could be. That's the spooky part, I think. Like, is that I think he's capable of doing horror, but the script writing has to be better.
Yeah. And
with horror, the writing matters so much.
You got to buy in. You have to buy in with personal stories. Brings me the As Above, So Below is one of those horror stories where you buy in because each portion of the horror that they experience in the Paris catacombs is personal to that person. It's not just a random jump scare. You know why they're seeing these particular horrific visions. And that makes it a lot more personal and I think a lot scarier because of their reaction, their visceral reaction to it. And we see that this is very personal to them. It's not just a random scary picture. It's something that is from their past. So I think that part, when you talk about making it personal and making you care, is done pretty well in As Above, So Below.
And you got to make it personal.
Yeah, because otherwise no one's going to care.
Like, which is one of the reasons why true crime is so popular, right?
Yeah.
Because we commiserate with people who actually existed. And I don't want to, do I consider the DC sniper as like, that was a big deal around here with the DC sniper because like there were 3 hits that were like within a 15-minute drive.
Wow.
I had been there like, within the last couple of days, and then the DC sniper had hit there. So I was afraid to leave my house. And then they revealed that it wasn't white males that did the job. They were African American. And all of a sudden, like, a lot of the commentary that I was hearing, they weren't expecting African Americans to be as witty, as crafty as the DC sniper had been. And
that's a whole commentary in and of itself.
That's a whole commentary. But it makes it scarier because people let their guard down, and they were expecting, like white male veterans,
right,
like ex-Navy SEAL or whatever. Mm-hmm. And they had let their guard down, and people were blindsided. Mm-hmm. They weren't looking for African American, snipers. They were looking for white snipers, which means more hits were happening while we were looking for the wrong people.
Right. Because of profiling and things like that.
Because of profiling. Yeah, absolutely. And
that was very scary. It was a big news story up here too, because it's like, it's so random. It's not even anything with, at least I remember with Ted Bundy, he preferred a certain type of victim. So you're like, oh, good, I don't have long hair or whatever. You can kind of.
That was the most horrific part of it, is that everyone was a target.
It didn't matter. If you breathed and were outside.
White, black,
it
did not matter.
Nope.
Everyone.
And that's the scariest of all, because it's like, well, okay, now I just need to stay in my house while all the blinds closed.
Yeah, it was a scary time. And I could write a story about it, and maybe it would be effective, especially for a generation that wasn't around. Mm. Like, what was it like living in the DC area when the DC sniper was loose? Mm. Like, what was that, 13 people?
Yep. I remember the guy was just mowing his lawn. That's the one that stood out to me. He's just out there minding his business.
Oh my God.
In front of your house, and then all of a sudden, okay.
So a lot of times people can commiserate with a monster who is going for, like, corruption of the system, mm-hmm. or they are they're commiserating in some way, like, especially if it's, they want to know a reason. Right. And it's understandable if they see corruption in the system, or it's which is why him going after kids, like, that was the most horrific.
Yes, in my, that was, you don't, because what did they do?
What do kids do to warrant, to make someone want to kill them?
Exactly.
It's one thing when it's a parent who has postpartum and, like, can't cope with the kid. Like, postpartum is scary in and of itself. Like, I have listened to people talk with postpartum depression, to postpartum rage, just emotion that is totally overblown. And
you're left alone, usually, with this tiny, helpless person who's the cause of all your problems. The woman in Texas who drowned all 5 of her kids.
All 5 of her.
That was horrific to me. I mean, imagine you just wanted, like, how far gone must have been. But when you hear the entire story, you can see how she just, nothing was helping her. The husband felt helpless to help her. The mental health system was janky in helping her, and it's just like, you can see she just went further downhill and down. And finally she's like, this is how I'm going to solve my problem, because no one else can help me. And
And
that is
and
frightening,
she
that with
needed
all these
some kind of
resources that she
catharsis.
couldn't be helped.
She needed catharsis, and
Yep.
that's how she found it,
Mhm.
right? If she found catharsis and it ended her problem. Granted, it made whole new problems,
Yep.
right? But she didn't have the forethought.
No, I don't think she was, from what you read and hear and what I heard on the program that I listened to, she was in no place to make any type of rational decision at that point. I can believe that, Raven. In New Jersey, we have full serve, so we don't get out of our cars.
In Virginia, like, so I had been at that gas station just the day before, and my friend was gassing up when it happened.
Wow.
He was at that gas station, and that's what made me afraid to leave my house. The Home Depot hit at Seven Corners, I believe, and the school hit, and I mean, it was just like one horror after another, and they were all like within a day, like within 2 days. It was all like hit, and they and he remained elusive throughout the month.
And it was summertime too, so it was a lot of people outside doing activities, doing things, games, picnics, things like that, which is probably why he chose that time.
Yeah. That was a lot of premeditation.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that he was premeditating randos, you know, like
Just taking the chance when he could.
And training a kid to do it, who was probably treating it more like a video game than anything else.
With no consequences.
With no consequences.
These are just NPCs. It's not.
Which is why it took them a long time to deliberate that he was going to be tried as an adult. But they eventually did. They tried him as an adult.
Wow.
Well, thank you all for joining us for this workshop on horror, and I hope this helps make your stories scarier. Dahlia, would you like to do an outro so everybody knows where to find you?
You can find me on Instagram at Dahlia DeWinters, and usually on YouTube. Even though I am of a certain age, I do not really hang out on Facebook unless it's for messaging. So Instagram, YouTube, that's where you'll find me.
And I'm Sako Toomey, also known as Cass Voit. I write horror, and I'm a witch, and I'm a graphic designer. And sometimes I combine those three things. If you liked this video at any point, please hit the like button. If you would like to see what we do in the future, please to be hitting subscribe and maybe even ring that bell. It might give you a notification. And we will catch you guys on the flip side.